All right, welcome to the Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars virtual teach-in. I'm so excited to be a part of this effort and this just summit of brilliant educators that I'm going to learn so much from. And I'm really happy to not be the center of attention of this moment. I'm really excited to shine a light on these two women that are with me today, Damaris Dunn and Neal, who are the authors of this beautiful article that I'm holding in my hand. It's called Our Ancestors' Wildest Dreams, Remembering the Freedom Dreams of Black Women Abolitionist Teachers. And when I read this, I cried. I cried. It felt like a love letter to me as a Black woman educator. So just a little bit about myself. I'm 12 years into my teaching career. I came here to Athens, Georgia, where I live, to get my master's in gifted education at the University of Georgia. And then after that, my career took a rather unconventional turn, and I started working at a homeschool learning center called Freedom to Grow Unschool. And I worked there and then became the owner and director of that program for 7 years. So I have a lot of experience with homeschoolers, and I'm really passionate about that topic, and ended up connecting with Dr. Cheryl Field-Smith because we have those similar interests, and I'll actually be contributing to the book that she's compiling on the topic in the near future. So that's kind of how I got plugged into this world. And as soon as I knew there was an opportunity to present a talk or a panel discussion, I knew I wanted to highlight the work of Damaris and Amber. So ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would love to just hear a little bit about your background, about where your passion for education originated in each of your lives, and then what led you to your current graduate work. And so we'll start with Amber. Do you want to share a bit about your background?
Sure. So I think my passion for education comes from just like a number of places. One, from the ancestors and their fight for literacy, my own parents, and then my own experiences. So growing up, my parents were both very active in ministry. They were both ministers and in the church. So their work wasn't just exclusive to the four walls of the church, but I saw it extended into the community. So they were involved in all type of community initiatives. They taught Bible study at a group home for a couple of years. And they were also very active in my own school, which me and my brothers didn't enjoy as much as I appreciate now as an adult, but they were very active throughout our lives and our education. So although my parents weren't formal teachers, I saw them make an impact in their teaching of the Bible, teaching of Black pride. I saw that, and I was inspired, and I wanted to do something similar and kind of walk in a similar path. I also had a teacher in 11th grade named Miss Tobin, who really opened the world for me by her introducing Black literature. So I remember reading Maya Angelou and James Baldwin, and it just hitting me so deep in my soul, and just me feeling like, you know what, these stories see me, or I see myself in these stories. So I really wanted to provide my students with some similar experiences. As far as what led me to like my doctoral studies at UGA, I actually came to education as a non-traditionally trained teacher. I got my master's in social work, and I spent several years as a child welfare social worker. So in that work, I saw the ways that the child welfare system punished and demonized Black parents, often just for their efforts to survive in this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, which bell hooks would say. So I just saw the ways it really impacted them in a negative way. So just for example, I remember a case where there was a Black single mother who was working really hard to provide for her children. And so she worked a lot of long hours in the evening. So because she didn't have anyone to babysit her kids, she entrusted her oldest child, who was probably 9 or 10 years old to take care of their younger siblings who had 2 younger siblings. So instead of offering support and seeing the ways that this mother was actually trying to provide for her children were removed from the home. And it just started this like really harmful snowball effect. So because she had to be present in court a lot, she lost her job, which impacted her finances, which impacted her case. Her children had to go to different schools, and they were started acting out in school. So I just saw how the welfare system or child welfare system, instead of offering support and guidance, they often made circumstances worse. But it was always cases like this that I saw, where Black families were the ones more often involved in the child welfare system than anyone else. So despite my like individual efforts to try to preserve their humanity, preserve their dignity, I felt like the child welfare system persistently demanded that I punish them. So I just felt like it went against my own ethical beliefs, my own morality. So I left and became a teacher. And maybe in my own naivete, like I thought that becoming a teacher would be better, it would be a lot easier. But come to find out, it was very similar to social work in a lot of ways. So Black families, Black students were marginalized. They were seen from deficit lenses. So it was in my practice as a teacher that I realized that it wasn't just social work. And it wasn't even just education, but it was this entire system of oppression that constantly worked against the Black community to keep us suppressed, to keep us marginalized. So I left education, well, the classroom, K-12 classroom, and came to this doctoral program to really learn more about these systems of oppression and to learn how we can disrupt these systems within education. So long story long, that's kind of what brought me to my doctoral program.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story.
For sure.
All right, Damaris, give us your background.
My background. So I am born and raised in New York City. I'm actually sitting in New York City. I live in Athens, visiting family for a month. It's been a month. It's time to go back home and get to work, like the real work. But this has been rejuvenating. So I guess I would give a lot of praise to my mom because she put Black books in front of us. And I didn't know at the time, but I was reading about Black scientists and all different types of folks who were doing the work. Like I remember having a book about Charles Drew. And I think it was like from the Coretta Scott King series of books. And so my mom gave us all these books, and so I think that was the catalyst for me understanding like who I am and where I come from. I just had a titi who turned 100 this past weekend, and so I was like, we were the archive in a sense because we were looking through old things and then making connections. And so I think my education really stems from like the Black and brown women in my family. And then my dad, when we were younger, he would always take us to the library. And so those, books were kind of fed to us in a really beautiful way. And also like Amber, I was a non-traditional teacher. I came in as a substitute by accident, like literally. I was a history major. I thought I was gonna end up in the archive. I thought that like that was gonna be my life. And I became a history teacher in Brooklyn, New York, and was able to serve Black and brown and Caribbean students. And that really changed my trajectory. I think my first year I didn't have a voice, not because I yelled, but because I talked so much, because I wanted to give the students all that I had, right? So I learned about history in undergrad. I had Black professors who really encouraged us to do that work. And I was like, my students need to know this too. And then I realized that I had to teach the test. And so I left and I transitioned out, and then I started working for a nonprofit where I could make my own curriculum, where I could be able to build what I wanted young people to see beyond their textbooks. And so that's kind of where I landed within education. And so I think it's been 8 years now since I kind of did that work. And then I was like, okay, how do we affect folks on a larger scale? Amber's out. How do we affect folks on a larger scale? And so I was like, I have to go and do my PhD. I need to do this work. And so here I am at the University of Georgia, working under the auspices of Dr. Bettina Love, and that has been such a joy. So yes. That's how
Tell
I
me
got.
more about when you first encountered Dr. Bettina Love's work. Let's just camp out there for a minute while Amber hops back on her computer,
Sure.
because it's been really impactful to me as well.
So I went to AERA, which is a huge educational conference. I guess it's the largest in the world, right? This is where everybody kind of sits and has discussions. Researchers discuss the topics within education across the field. And so 2 years ago, a friend invited me to go, and I connected actually with Yolanda Sealy Ruiz, who was another amazing Black woman academic and so much more. And I got to follow her for the day. And so I met Cynthia Dillard, Dr. Dillard, who was Amber's advisor. And I met so many other incredible Black women. And amongst those Black women were Dr. Love. And she was sitting on a panel in honor of Dr. Dillard. And so I was like, I got to work with, like, one, I have to go back to school. And two, I have to work with these women. And I don't know where they are in the world, but I need to work with them. And so I went home and I looked up everything about Dr. Love and pretty much all the women on the panel. And when I was applying to school, I had University of Georgia, Syracuse, and 2 other institutions. And when I got my decisions back, I consulted my mentor, who is Yolanda Sealy Ruiz, and she said, you're going to UGA, right? Like, you don't even have to think about it. And since then, Dr. Love has been an incredible role model, big sister, mentor, all the things. And so her work, around abolition has really helped me to think beyond what is in front of us. And so that has been my experience with Dr. Love's work. And so the next time I got to see her, she had basically delivered my acceptance to me at the Schoenberg Center when she did a talk at the Schoenberg. And that was just incredible. So, like, the stars really aligned with me meeting up with Dr. Love and Amber. Me and Amber sat and talked for at least 2 hours when I got to Georgia about just like what to expect, and just the excitement around like another Black woman being in the program. And so Amber has been a huge instrument and mentor as well, with doing this doctoral thing. But Dr. Love definitely, getting to meet her, I was like, I got to work with her, right? Like, I wanted to be under the auspices of a Black woman, doing my work under a Black woman. I need a Black woman to teach me how to navigate this space. And so I'm super honored to work under her.
Yeah. And I just wanted to pause and highlight her because she's leading this larger movement across our nation, right? And is putting these words in people's mouths, abolitionist teaching, which are the words that you guys chose for your subtitle. And so I just want to dive into this content because right off the bat in this article, you're identifying the white-centric narrative that is often found in the history of abolition work. Okay, you say, the picture of an abolitionist usually calls to mind white men and women advocating on behalf of the enslaved. However, revolutionary African Americans prompted much of the effort and were early anti-slavery agitators. And obviously, in the context of education, we're expanding that term of abolition to encompass much more than like anti-slavery work. But my question for you is, why is it so important to highlight Black abolitionists like you did in your article?
I guess I could take this one. So just like we said in the article, usually when we hear abolition, and even in the literature that we read, a lot of times it was talking about white abolitionists, white religious abolitionists. Even the narrative that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves is so prevalent, and it's even taught that way in the curriculum, but it's so false. And I think we all know that it's false. Yes, he did play a role in the story, but there were no white saviors in this story at all. So in reality, it was enslaved people who were resisting enslavement in so many ways, even before they got to the New World, whether that was taking over ships, running away, jumping off ships. Even before, just like I said, even before they got to the New World, they knew that they were not an enslaved people, that was not their condition. So I just think that the abolitionist work or the abolitionist rhetoric that we're hearing now is just a continuation of the resistance that we saw throughout history. So I would just thought it was really important for us to highlight that Black abolitionists, Black anti-slavery activists, we have been doing this for such a long time. And I think even more so than that, it was important to highlight Black women, because a lot of times when we talk about abolitionism, we talk about fugitive slaves, we talk about the way that Black men spoke publicly about abolitionists or anti-slavery. But a lot of times, because the Black women who were doing this work, their work was so subversive, it was underground, it was secretive. Their work is often shrouded. So I thought it was really important to highlight Black women who had been doing the work, but whose stories were often silenced in like the historical narrative. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. I want to connect some dots because our listeners, lots of them are homeschooling parents or educators that are somehow involved in homeschooling who may be wondering, okay, abolitionist teaching, what does this have to do with homeschooling? And in my mind, so this panel is entitled Teaching Our Own. And you all highlight 3 women in your article that I really think embody that ethos in a really important way that is similar to the way that we see Black women, Black moms who are gravitating towards homeschooling, like especially in the wake of COVID. It's that same, like, we got to take this into our own hands. There was just an article, at least 8 people sent it to me the other day about the rise of Black homeschooling. I think it was in NPR, right? So this is like a movement, and it's a Black women powered movement. And so I just think that there are some strategies that we can download from these women that you all highlighted in your article, even as we participate in this current movement. So there are 3 women that you all share the stories of: Lillian Granderson, Mary Smith Peak, and Charlotte Fortin. And I would love to learn just a little bit about each of those women. I don't know if y'all want to take turns like talking about them or however y'all want to do that.
Yeah, I'll start with Lillian Granderson. And so much of this work is Amber's work, right? Like, so Amber is all up in these abolitionist women teachers. And so, but I think this piece around like subversiveness and this piece around like these clandestine spaces. So Lillian Granderson, she acquired her literacy skills from her master's, right? So she doesn't, no one is like giving her books and saying like, here, she's learning like in the background, right? More or less. And then she starts teaching other people how to read, 12 people at a time, right? And so you have this woman incredibly like just in the background, learning how to read and then teaching other people how to read, right? And so I think that that's a big part of her story. And the law prohibited her to do this, right? So she could be killed, and she's doing this work. So I think that that's really a snippet of what she does.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'll take over or chit chat a little bit about Mary Peak. So she had a little bit of a different story than Lillian Granderson. She went to school up north, and everything was going great. Like she loved going to school. She loved learning how to read. She loved to read. But once legislation outlawed education for all Black people, not just enslaved Black people, it outlawed education for free and enslaved Black people, her education stopped. But still, she had this deep desire, not only just to continue her education, but also to pass on this learning to other people. So, so she used her literacy, kind of similar to Lillian, to secretly teach enslaved and Black people in her home. So Laura, just like you were saying, this legacy of Black women, homeschoolers, we see that a lot in Mary Peak's story. So she opened her home to free and enslaved Black folks, actually in Hampton, Virginia, despite it being forbidden, despite it being outlawed, despite the facts that she could be killed, or the fact that she could go to prison or go to jail for her actions, she still did it. So when her and her family ended up moving down south, but when Confederate soldiers raided the area, they torched her home. But the Black community ended up working together, pulling their resources together, and they actually built up the Black community again. So of course, people had been hearing about her work, and the Black community requested for her to resume her school. So she was actually, the American Missionary Association, they started to build up schools in the South, in the war-torn South, like right in the middle of the Civil War. And they actually hired her to be their first formal Black teacher, and they provided a cottage for her school. So eventually she became ill, but I think what was amazing about her story is that even though she was ill, she couldn't even get out of the bed, but she continued to teach these Black folks, these Black kids, and Black adults too. So she's laying in her bed and she's like, I have a mouthpiece. I may be sick, I may be ill, I may be, sick and shut in, I can't move my body, but my mind still works. And she transmitted all the knowledge she had to these Black folks. And although a lot of these women that we talk about in our article, they don't explicitly talk about their dreams for education, but we see their dreams through their actions, through their activities, through their subversiveness. I just think that her actions show such a radical love for Black people and an urgency. Like, even though I'm sick, there is something to be said about that, to be said about her actions. So yeah, that's Mary Smith Peak.
And Charlotte Fortin, she's a part of this abolitionist family, right? So if you look up the Fortins, they are really pushing the abolitionist movement as Black folks. And with her, she receives a full education. She's one of the first Black women, or one of the first Black girls, to attend an all-white school, right? So she's she's desegregating schools in the early 19th century, right? Or late 19th century. And so with her, she decides that she wants to go to the Sea Islands and teach. And she really, we get to see her through the lens of, like, she wants to teach Black history. So she says, like, I want to teach y'all about Toussaint Louverture, right? Who is the guy who leads us to, who leads Haiti, right, to being a free country. And she says that, right? Like, she instills that in the young people in South Carolina on the Sea Islands, right? And so she is also very monumental in this movement, but she comes from a family of educators and abolitionists who are leading this movement. She's a part of the conversation. She's sitting at the feet of abolitionists from the very time that she grows up. And so I think she has a very interesting story. And her story really resonated with me because this is the first time I saw, like, anti-slavery language, right? In what she's writing in her book. You start to see the language kind of appear, or anti-racist, right? So we think that this language is new language, but this is stuff that folks have been talking about for a really, really, really long time. And so that's Charlotte Fortin.
And I just want to add to that too, because now we hear culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive, culturally sustaining pedagogy. And it seems like, wow, these are this amazing new thing out there. But what we see in history is like Black women, we've been about this. We've been knew how to teach. We've been knew what to teach. It's not new to us. This is a radical tradition of Black women that has been going on for so long. And I think another thing that really resonates with me about Charlotte's story is that she was really well off. She was very privileged in a lot of ways. She grew up in the North. She grew up in Philadelphia. It was a lot of abolitionists up there doing incredible work, but she was willing to sacrifice and put her own privilege to the side in order to make sure that these formerly enslaved people had this liberatory knowledge. And I think that's a huge part of what abolitionism in the contemporary time calls for, that you must be willing to give up something. You must be willing to put your privilege, your position, your perspective on the line in order to free some folks, in order to make sure that Black folks are really free, in order to disrupt and abolish these oppressive systems. So I really love her story. And she wrote this, just like Damaris was saying, she wrote this diary. She actually published part of her diary in, I want to say, a magazine or a newspaper.
Atlantic.
Yes, in the Atlantic Monthly. And even she was amazed by these formerly enslaved people. They had been enslaved their entire lives. They were still actually working in the fields as sharecroppers in different roles. They will work all morning and afternoon, but still come to school with such a desire, like, to want to learn. So even just seeing that, her expressing that, I was just like, wow, just the tenacity of Black people to want to get education, to realize that education meant something, that it can open up doors, that like Bell Hooks talks about, it's a path towards freedom, or a practice of freedom. So I really enjoyed learning about these Black women. I think me and Dee both saw ourselves, our stories reflected in their stories. So it's like I said, there's this long legacy of Black women doing incredible work, doing culturally responsive work. So yeah.
Man, absolutely. I saw myself in these stories, and I was chuckling to myself when you said abolitionists have to be willing to sacrifice something. I was just thinking about what me and my husband have sacrificed in the last year as we decided to homeschool our child throughout this pandemic, and have an emphasis on teaching her our history. And, you know, the scores and scores of families that we stand alongside who made that same decision for similar reasons. Huge amounts of sacrifice in order to get these Black babies what they need. So shout out to the foremothers for paving the way. How do you all think these women embody teaching our own, and how do they provide a blueprint for Black parents and educators to follow in our current climate, with everything going on, with the backdrop of critical race theory being banned in our schools here in Georgia? Like, how do these women give us a path forward through all of that?
I mean, their praxis, right? How they live their lives, their willingness to give up the time, their willingness to put their lives on the line, right? I think that's what Black families have always done so that we could receive an education, to physically put your body on the line, knowing that you could be killed because you were teaching somebody how to read. Like that, if that's not love, if that is not a willingness to see beyond the spaces that you're in, then I don't know what is. And when I think about parents who are homeschooling their children, right, they're putting their lives and their time and their bodies on the line to be able to do that work, because that's hard work. You know, it's really hard work, and it's really hard work to teach your own child, right? Because you get, I could only imagine, right? You know, our work in schools as teachers was hard work with 20 to 30 kids in a classroom, but to really want to instill something in your own child, to make sure that they're getting everything that they need. This is what these women did. And at all different levels, right? Like Amber mentioned, Fortin, she had access. And whereas these other women did not, but still they had the same goal in mind. Right. And that's to make sure that we receive the education, make sure that folks were literate so that they could get where they needed to be. And that's what we do. We always make a way out of no way, no matter what. That is in our blood. And so I think that that's what these women show us, right? Is that even with a bare ground and nothing to work with, you can do it. You can do it.
Yes. Yes. Just all the things. Just all the things, Dee. Everything she said. You mentioned the fight against critical race theory, which I think is so crazy because I don't know not one teacher who is actually explicitly teaching critical race theory in schools, which is just like, okay. But it's so much deeper than that. And I think this is what these Black women teachers exemplify, that education and teaching is inherently political. What we talk about in school, what we omit from our conversations in school, is all political, that there's no such thing as a neutral curriculum. So in their classrooms, in whatever iteration that was, whether that was on the ground, whether that was underneath the tree, whether that was in their homes, we see in history that Black women created school spaces in the bushes, like literally creating space, creating liberatory space for them to go in these bushes and teach these kids. And I think they just show us that regardless of what it takes, it is so vital to make sure that these kids, and I think in our contemporary times, kids of all races, all backgrounds, all ethnicities, that they are developing, that they have this critical consciousness about the world. What does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be white? What is the history of our nation? What does it mean for our future? And if they're not provided with this critical consciousness, we're bound to recreate, we're bound to repeat the same things. So I just think they just show us what it takes to do this work in our contemporary times. It's like we said, it takes self-sacrifice. It takes us refusing to follow unjust laws or unjust laws. It takes creativity, them literally creating, just like I said, creating space, making a way out of no way, like you said, Dee. So I think they really create or have provided us that blueprint on how to be abolitionist teachers.
So beautiful. And I see that reflected in my community of Black parents trying to do the best for their kids. Dr. Fieldsmith talks a lot about reversing the narrative, or really this trope of like the disengaged Black parents. Mm-hmm. Like, none of us know that to be true. Like when y'all are talking about your moms, my mom was the exact same way, and so was her mom, and so was her mom, right? Like that desire to rise through the vehicle of education is just very, very present. And what I see in the homeschooling movement now is everyone is conscious of this as a liberatory practice. Mm-hmm. Like mm-hmm. There's such intentionality behind it and such forethought behind it. Mm-hmm. Like you said, Damaris, by people of all levels of means, mm-hmm. Who want their kids to be prepared for the future. So as we think about the future, this will be our last question. I want to close the same way that you all close the article. So you end your article with some freedom dreaming, and that practice or just that language comes from Robin D.G. Kelley, who once wrote, "Any revolution must begin with thought, with how we imagine a new world, with how we construct our social and individual relationships, with unleashing our desire and unfolding a new future on the basis of love and creativity rather than rationality." And I love that y'all included that in the article. So my final question for you is, what are your freedom dreams for our Black youth? If you had all the resources in the world and you could make anything come to life, what would you wish for them?
I think in most of the things that I've written, I always go back to the Schoenberg Center where I worked. I worked for 5 years in New York with a group of incredibly talented educators, all Black educators. And they wouldn't consider themselves as educators in their own right because they have different trades, right? Like my friend Scott, he's a sculptor and a visual artist. I had a friend, Ramel, he was an actor, right? And so in this program at the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture, young people, the first half of it, they get to engage in the literature. And so we'll read a book together, and it's students ages 5 in 5th grade through 12th grade, right? So we have 11-year-olds, 10 and 11-year-olds, and 18-year-olds engaging in this space together, doing work together. And I guess my ideal space would be someplace like the Schoenberg Junior Scholars Program for Black children, where they get to see themselves. I was a part of an archival research group or led them, and we were just in the archives and uncovering our stories and understanding ourselves and piecing ourselves back together, right? So I think for me, it's a space where Black and brown children see themselves in their educators. And it's not to say that white folks can't do the work, because I think that there are some incredible co-conspirators who are doing the work with us, but it's a space where Black children see themselves, where Black children are engaged in Black history at all times, where they get to put themselves back together. Because I think so many of us are disjointed from who we are and how we show up in the world. And if you know where you come from, you know where you're going. So I think for me, my freedom dream is that kids get to see themselves and not like in these little tidbits. You know what I mean? Like I didn't learn about Juneteenth until I was I started teaching at the Schoenberg. You know what I mean? And I was damn near 20 years old. And so I think it's very important that we get that history early on, because then we're grounded in something, and then we can move forward in doing what we have to do in order to help other people.
It's beautiful. Amber, what about you?
I'm just going to read an excerpt from the paper. It's long, so I'm just going to cut a couple of pieces out. But I dream of a school where Black brilliance is inheritance, joy is unspeakable, laughter is uncontained, and mattering is the minimum. I dream of a radical coalition of abolitionists, teachers, administrators, parents, paraprofessionals, and community leaders willing to sacrifice and lay down their very livelihoods for the wellness of Black children, aware yet unafraid of the risk associated with agitation, disruption, and abolishing unjust systems inside and outside of schools. I dream of pedagogies of the spirit, grounded in nurturing the whole Black child, reclaiming humanity through radical love, beloved community, and collective care. Pedagogies that welcome students to be vulnerable, emptying the heaviness of their hearts and minds and being filled to the brim in schools. Schools without police, but as many social workers, psychologists, dance instructors, exhorters, and healers as teachers, who allow the full spectrum of human emotion and bodily experience. I dream of Black students being free. So that's just, again, just a little piece of our article, but just like I said, I dream of Black students coming to school and being free, just allowed to be themselves and whatever that looks like, whatever iteration of Blackness that looks like. And I think that dream, the amazing thing about Black women is that our dream doesn't just begin and end with Black kids or the Black community, but this dream of freedom, of liberation extends to all oppressed people. So this dream is extended to everybody, where everybody can show up being free in school, that they all have this nurturing environment to learn and be themselves and take their knowledge and do something with it. So that's my dream.
So beautiful. Yes.
Now I want to read.
We wrote it.
I wanted to read the piece on Black girl joy, but yes.
Do you have it?
Yes, it's in front of me, but I don't know.
Maybe we can share it with the participants somehow, like in the chat after this. But I really appreciate both of your words. So beautiful. And to our listeners, this free space that they're describing, that can be your home. So I hope that you have found some inspiration from what we've talked about today. And thanks so much for participating. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you.